Clara, thank you. You know, there's no tougher crowd anywhere than a Unitarian congregation. If you've mastered this, you're set. See you in Carnegie Hall. Thank you very much. Good morning, tough crowd, and welcome to the First Unitarian Church in Salt Lake City. Welcome into this house of light and hope. We gather as a church community to stretch our minds, to deepen our spirits, to share our smiles, to give and receive comfort and hope. In our time of worship together, may our burdens be eased, the soul refreshed, and praise be given to the wonders that there are. Symbol of light and of knowledge, symbol of warmth and freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love. May we open our service, turning our hymn books, please, to number 123. Well, this meditation is not on Ukraine, nor on anything hard to explain, like why we're speaking Latin, quid pro quo, and examining the meaning of a word like though. Why not call it tit for tat? You scratch my back and all of that. But this meditation is not on impeaching, not on immigration or things far-reaching, like the end of DACA, because they're no angels, like another school shooting, where 2 are slain, nor about the homeless, and it's winter again. This meditation is not on Ukraine. This meditation is not on the EPA ending science, sending science on its way so we can breathe the dirty air and drink the toxins without care. This meditation is not on warming, nor on bees that have stopped swarming, nor on fires that rage extreme, and the sage grouse gone as if a dream. This meditation is not on Ukraine. We have We have other worries to complain, like getting through the day without crying, like exposing truth to stop the denying. What needs to change so Black Lives Matter? How do we stop the hateful chatter? How do we unload the weight and contemplate a better fate? To imagine a life where civility reigns and beauty abounds and peace ingrained, where our spirits are lifted once again. This meditation is not on Ukraine. There are some writing styles that are so distinct. You can tell who the author is from miles away. And I think that if you didn't see in your order of service or have me announce that the author is Garrison Keillor, you would know, you could detect that this was indeed Garrison Keillor. He can write about hard times in America and still manage to put a smile on your face. And for him, I don't know how he does it other than his salvation, and this will all become clear. His salvation is not necessarily religion, it's not the new great statesman to come down the pike, but it's poetry. Poetry rides in on the proverbial white horse and saves the day. And you may want to ask the next time you're entangled in a conversation with someone who is just complaining about hard times in America, ask that person, when was the last time you read some poetry? Maybe that'll turn things around. At least it does for Garrison. America is in hard times these days. The beloved country awash to the scuppers in expensive trash, gripped by persistent jitters, politics even more divorced from reality than usual. The levers of power firmly in the hands of a cadre of Christian pirates and bullies whose cynicism is stunning, especially their perversion of the gospel of the Lord to blast the poor and the meek and subvert the tax system in favor of the rich, while public institutions are put into perpetual fiscal crisis. Meanwhile, newspapers dwindle in sad decline. Journalism is lost in the whirlwind of amusement. What mustn't be lost in this dank time is the passion of young people for truth and justice and liberty, the spirit that has kept the American porch light lit through the dark ages of history. And when this spirit is betrayed by the timid and the greedy and the naive, when we must depend, and the need, then we must depend on the poets. American poetry is the truest journalism we have. What your life can be, lived bravely and independently, you can discover in poetry. How often in the past week did anyone offer you something from the heart? It's there in poetry. Forget everything you ever read about poetry, it doesn't matter. Poetry is the last preserve of honest speech and the outspoken heart. The common life is precarious. I fear a future in which America becomes a loose aggregate of marauding tribes. No binding traditions, no songs we all know, not even the Star-Spangled Banner or Silent Night, or common heroes, no American literature, only the promotional lit of race and ethnicity. Are people unable to name their senators, their only political experience via television, their only public life at Walmart? There are no more TV shows that everyone knows. 10% of audience is a huge hit. The last singer recognizable to everyone was Frank Sinatra. The last poet known far and wide was Robert Frost. There are no replacements in sight. Today's celebrities are people who most Americans haven't heard of. Our culture, jazz especially, and movies once united us, a point of pride, uniquely American. But school boards are slaughtering arts education on every hand. Programs are dead or dying that used to bus kids to hear an orchestra or see a play. Children are cheated out of poetry and French and cello. Meanwhile, interscholastic football, the great passion of unhappy men, grows by leaps and bounds, and children are conditioned for the passive life in which commercial trademarks become their insignia here in the United Corporations of America. Poetry is free speech. It is ever on the side of the irrepressible spirit and in opposition to the censor, to management, to the protocols of the company psychologist. It's on the side of exhilaration and the stupendous vision, the sight of the stars through the barred window, the perfection of small birds, the democracy of their chittering language, and of our own yakfest and hullabaloo. Poetry is made for the grandeur, a grandeur that is available to everyone. Our announcements this morning are not plentiful. First, a special greetings and welcome to everyone who may be here for the very first time. And also, please note that if you are here visiting or church shopping or whatever you call it, there's a lovely welcome table right outside that door. And please be sure to stop by, and I hope to catch up with you before the coffee hour is over. We get a chance to introduce ourselves and maybe learn a little bit more about this great congregation of ours. Tomorrow night, we're going to have, at least for the fall term, our last book group. We've been doing a series of African-American novelists, and tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, right in Elliott Hall, we're going to finish up that series with a discussion on Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, The Water Dancer, and hope those of you who have been aware of this, that you show up and that you discuss your insights in this book. And even if you haven't read it, well, you may want to tag along anyway, because there are a lot of themes that are evoked that are certainly relevant for the times that we live in today, the hard times in which we live. And yes, that book is a lot like poetry. So, yeah, please note that. Take a look at all the amazing offerings in this church in terms of education, in terms of spirituality, in terms of just socializing. It's a pretty full and rich community. The offering will now gratefully be received, a chance to greet one another and bid each other a fine good morning. So I've been trying to make sense of things, an exercise I don't recommend. It can bring on vertigo, I swear. It can lead to despair, and a couple of frustrations are accumulated. Just this week raised another round of symptoms that reveals a shocking dearth of sympathy towards people who exist on the margins of society. And I ask, as I'm sure we all do, are we really such uncaring people? Even as we move closer to the Thanksgiving holiday, when we're supposed to unleash and celebrate our generosity and selflessness, when we like to prove to everyone and to ourselves that we do care for those who have so little in a society awash in affluence. Even when the holiday known for sharing our bounty is almost upon us, well, we seem to prefer an almost a natural inclination to shut out the imperatives about caring for our neighbor. We do some generous things, but how deeply do we really feel, just in our souls, this mandate to care for our neighbor? Now as winter is about to smack the homeless population, the Road Home's emergency downtown shelter will be shut in about a month's time. New homeless resources scattered throughout the city should be open by then, yet they will provide hundreds of fewer beds than were available in the first place in the downtown shelter. Our city's most vulnerable population, increasing numerically in shameful proportions, won't be able to find a warm bed, while at the same time police ticket them for camping on the street, or vagrancy, as is their preferred term. And just this week, the U.S. Supreme Court seemed poised to shut down the program protecting between 700,000 and 800,000 young undocumented immigrants known as Dreamers. And we all know this will affect people who came to our country illegally as children, who have no other memory of home save the U.S., who have been educated here and look forward to a future as fine, contributing citizens. And yet they stand to be targets for deportation to a land as foreign to them as it would be to any of the Supreme Court justices themselves. I'm trying to make sense not only of why we want to undermine the trust of young immigrants who are fully invested in the success of our nation, but I wonder what happens to the, shall we call it art, the art of caring, when squeezed by a body politic that flaunts its care for those who already have so much. Those who have little don't factor into the equation. How is it conceivable for us to turn our backs every day on those whom we actually see struggle, and thereby neglecting the most fundamental command of moral living, to care for those in need? Pope Francis, my favorite pope of all times. He could be a Unitarian Universalist if he's ever in trouble. He brazenly called for, his words, the redistribution of wealth. Because, he says, the Bible demands it. Wow. When asked how she would pay for universal health care, I wish Elizabeth Warren would have said, the Bible demands it. It could have saved her coming up with yet another policy. Pope Francis proclaimed that we must resist participating in this. That's his term, his phraseology. We must resist participating in an economy of exclusion. That sums it up, doesn't it? The economy of exclusion. That's what the Pope says. So who's the better Christian? Bernie Sanders, who's not really Christian, or Mitch McConnell, or Mike Pence, or all the evangelicals who insist that the Son of God is really a capitalist. You know, there have been 10 different versions of the DREAM Act since 2001. Now, until Obama was elected, there were 23 Republican senators, sometimes more, who voted for the DREAM Act. And that number fell to 0 under Obama. Racism trumps caring. You can interpret that phrase any way you want. The lives of close to 1 million young immigrants now stands possibly to be shattered. But it doesn't end there. Breaking promises without regard to consequences has become now, in this country, a new normal. We betray our NATO allies. We betray the Kurds who fought alongside our soldiers in Syria. We betray those in lower-paying public service jobs like teachers, nurses, firefighters, police officers, social workers, who were promised back in the day when they started their college careers that their student loan debt would be wiped out in return for their services to the community. Not going to happen. But giving back to the community, providing care for others has become a lost concept. Instead, what's happening? We're authorizing tax breaks for the rich while slashing social programs for the poor. Most Americans, it seems, prefer to adopt another storyline. There's none of this, you got to give to the poor, the whole Thanksgiving theme. No, it's a whole different storyline, which is preferable for holding on to what you have. And I think the new storyline was, at least in my memory, some of yours don't go back as far, some go back further, was when Ronald Reagan introduced this mythology of the welfare queen, the poor receiving entitlement at the expense of hard-working Americans. And then there's a great story Orrin Hatch offered, kind of an echo of Reagan's. This was right before Hatch retired. He said, "I have a rough time wanting to spend billions and trillions of dollars to help people who won't help themselves, won't lift a finger, and expect federal governments to do everything." Huh? That's a convenient story. Interesting, though. If we're talking food stamps, the beneficiaries are children, the elderly, the disabled. The rest who receive food stamps are all working pretty hard at menial jobs, not earning enough to get by. So we need to flip this a little bit and come to understand that those who actually benefit from our government and don't lift a finger are the inheritors of large estates. We're looking at an exemption from taxes up to $22.5 million. But if you got the storyline going, it makes sense, at least it does, to Senator Chuck Grassley, who said, we need to recognize the people who are investing as opposed to those that are spending every darn penny they have, whether it's on booze or women or the movies. So I'm trying to do the math. If I abstain from my Pinot, stop buying flowers for my wife, ignore the Salt Lake Film Society, well, then I too should have a $22 million estate. We'll see if it adds up. But what has really happened before our very eyes is a division of our country between those who are deemed deserving and those who are lumped in this category of undeserving. What a frightening proposition. People in our community undeserving of health care, undeserving of housing, undeserving, who knows, Social Security maybe? And what is most alarming, at least it is for me, is watching and feeling the rage against those labeled as undeserving. It's this rage against that population. You know, not only are we dripping hypocrisy between the pages of our Bibles, we show utter contempt for the public, contempt for the community of people who comprise our society. The chief ethical rule now, rather than care for the other, is radical individualism. The pursuit of self-interest as opposed to pursuing a common good, or used to call it the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So this individualism has now surfaced as the real moral calculus. It's kind of like the old saying, if you've got the money, honey, then purchase your private pleasures, because, and the body politic has succeeded in painting a nasty picture of the alternative, because with all those undeserving types getting handouts, you'd be a sucker if you showed you cared. You know, I don't think anyone has yet to mention that, my goodness, if you can imagine, if we continue along the line of exclusionary economics, and you don't even have to take it to an extreme, but if you just ratchet it up a notch, then at some point it'll feel like, well, we're all just a bunch of gladiators. Every person for himself, herself. Eliminating a morality of cooperation, we are left with nothing but individual pursuits and interests. And if you want to visualize what that might look like, we'll take a snapshot of where we presently are. The loss of civility in the public square. A failure to demonstrate care towards those in need. We experience a huge void in that area of caring. Now, I think we would agree that there has always been this tension between the accumulation of personal things, the accumulation of personal wealth, that's been in tension with contributing to the creation of an egalitarian community. Now, the 18th century was famous for the airing of opinions about what they called the social contract. Great thinkers like Hobbes and Rousseau, John Locke, presented different accounts of what the agreement should be among members of society as to, what lengths we should go to achieve benefits for all. How much do we compromise our own well-being? How do we give? So there's this social contract that needs to be worked out. And I guess we're still working on the social contract, although it's a little different now in 2019, because the social contract seems less concerned about contributing, and it's really become a contract of self-absorption. The general welfare is really inconsequential. This is how the contract currently reads, at least in my estimation. But now this tension between individual fulfillment and the needs of community dwells not in America alone. I think there's always been, and probably always will be, a rather universal human struggle to understand how we can reconcile, to be honest, personal greed and want with the need for caring for others. And different cultures attack this tension or this problem in different ways. The premise in Buddhism is that personal greed is the root of all suffering, because it is delusional to think that we can exist independently of our environment. And furthermore, this is the antithesis of capitalism, Buddhists will say there is no thing to be obtained that brings you happiness. Buddhism brings into question what the individual is actually seeking. What are you looking for? Claiming it's a false premise to believe that the world revolves around you and that you want to make the world as comfortable for yourself as possible. That's a false premise in life. But this concept that we're not all independent is not easily translatable to the Western mind. Wendell Berry gave it good voice, however, in his essay on rugged individualism. Berry refers to this romantic notion of individualism as tragic. That's his word. This individualism has gotten to the level where it is tragic. He writes that individualism has been wrongly interpreted as the presumptive right of individuals to do as they please, as if there was no God, no legitimate government, no community, no neighbors, and what's so essential, no posterity. So Wendell Berry, an old Kentucky farmer who does some writing on the side, a little poetry now and again, addresses this failure of individualists to take the future into account. He writes, rugged individualism has cost us dearly in lost topsoil, in destroyed forests, in the increasing toxicity of the world, and in annihilated species. Individualism is used to justify the abuse of things of permanent value for the temporary benefit of property owners. In the name of rugged individualism, things are abused that can only belong to the public, that can only belong to the entire community of living creatures, like atmosphere, water, wilderness, ecosystems, and the very possibility of life. I think that's just a wonderful phrase he introduces. Does he mention all those items? And he ends with the very possibility of life is in jeopardy because of the strong bent on individualism. Berry notes that rugged individuals, you're going to love this, are autistic in their interactions with the natural world. They're unable to value the life and beauty of nature because of their own egocentric perspectives and short-sighted needs. Now, Buddhist thought may well embrace Wendell Berry's thinking on individualism, but Buddhism is, in fact, even more exacting in terms of dismantling individualist feelings of entitlement. Now, where Berry and other progressive Christians and Unitarians merely lament the dearth of caring in human communities and in nature, it amounts to little else than simply making a request or a recommendation to change priorities. And when this request of others to change priorities is not followed, then we end up in a puddle of despair. Now, the underlying principle in Buddhism, however, couldn't be more simple. Get over yourself. Buddhism clarifies our mistakes, our wrong thinking, that we identify the body as who we are, and thus see everything else as separate and apart from ourselves. You know, we see others as external things. We even see the sun, the moon, mountains, rivers, oceans, trees, flowers, the grasses, all separate from ourselves. Because we believe that that's the case. We believe that so strongly, we just take it. That's the way it is. That's a fact of life. This is how we proceed on our life's journey. But this is a false belief that somehow imprisons us, makes it so hard to do what is right, to perceive the world as it ought to be. Now, because of our belief that we are separate from others, separate from nature, Buddhism will say, we create a lot of problems. Competitiveness is the big one. Trying to get ahead of others, stepping on each other. We become angry with each other. We try to control each other. And then when we don't get our way, we condemn the other. Believing that we are separate and apart, we see ourselves and our tribe, well, we are the deserving. While the others, separate from who we are undeserving. You know who they are. The ones, the poor who won't lift a finger. The ecosystems over there, they're just in the way of drawing more fossil fuel. Total disconnection. So Unitarianism, stemming from a Western Christian tradition, remains trapped in a finger-wagging message of should. You should do this and that in order to heal a broken community. We do a lot of shoulds, don't we? Yeah. Buddhism, however, is not about should. Buddhism is. It tells you how it's coming down. The emphasis is on learning through mindfulness not trying to go around convincing others to make changes. No, this is something that you must learn for yourself. So the whole Judeo-Christian tradition, of which Unitarians, of course, are a part, relies mostly on wishing things were different, wishing people would be more caring. And thus, a minister stands up in the front of a church and complains about the world while offering perhaps some hope that all who listen will then become conscious of the interconnected web of all existence of which we are a part. Hear my words, hear my words. Buddhism, on the other hand, is not about hoping and wishing. It teaches tough lessons that we are not the center of the universe. It teaches that our self-centeredness creates patterns and habits that cause grief, pain, confusion, and even hate. It teaches that self-interest manufactures fear so that we create barriers between ourselves and others. These are the lessons that we must learn. So, Unitarianism and progressive Christianity hope. They hope and they pray for change. Buddhism teaches a practice that, liberates us from our egocentrism. I'd love to combine the two. It's hard. I've tried both. There are only so many hours in a day. But Buddhism and progressive Western religions are indeed of the same mind when it comes to caring. Basically, that caring for a suffering humanity is linked with a caring for nature. And empathy figures prominently in each. Now, since I live and breathe and work in a Western culture, I feel that I must engage in activities that stimulate change, be they rallies or protests, demonstrations, or some activity that gets me off my butt to champion a new way of life. I must urge and argue and persuade that caring is an indispensable component for how we must conduct our lives. Now, it is simply not enough for me to sit in meditation and become aware or enlightened about the illusion of being separate from nature. But I know it's there, and I hear it, and I try to absorb the teachings as best I can, because it really does fuel me. It helps me really kind of just wrap my arms about what is so hard, what is so wrong in society, how we go about it. Now, once again, I must defer to Wendell Berry, who captures the essence of Buddhist thought and bends it towards Western comprehension. Now, his message is that all of nature constitutes a cooperative whole, unlike rugged individualism that regards the world as a collection of disparate things. Once we humans see ourselves as special and unique, we lose sight completely of the mutuality and independent nature of existence. And finally, we in the West use Jesus as a model, who, traveled many lands, trying to persuade others how important it was to care. And so now, in all his discussions and all his parables and all his shoulds and all his reminders, these days, Jesus' words are subject to interpretation. And you find the evangelicals say, Jesus, he made some recommendations on how to live, They were posited in ancient times, but it's different now. It's no longer relevant. And even back then, as we know, it didn't end so well for Jesus either. But Christianity provides a startling contrast with Buddhism. It is just so contrasting with Dharma. Dharma, the Buddhist word for truth and the teaching. But I think what very few people realize is that Dharma is also the word for nature. And that is because they are the same. Nature is the manifestation of truth and teachings. When we destroy nature, we destroy the truth and the teachings. When we protect nature, we protect the truth and the teachings. So we in the West go forth and rally and protest and demonstrate and get arrested because we try to make the truth visible. If we do not integrate this truth into the very fabric of our lives, we can see already there will be no tomorrow. The truth and nature are the same. Caring for nature is not distinct from caring for the human community. This is not subject to interpretation. It simply is. Period. What will it take for us in the West to learn this truth, incorporate it, and live by its teachings? You know, sadly, we still rely so much on hope and prayer and activism to change selfish interests. But this is what our culture demands of us, you know, if we want to address the need for more caring, empathy, compassion. What do we try to do as we go out and convince others is try to act as or serve as a model of selflessness so that others may follow our lead. But all we really want, I think, is for everyone to truly understand the one message, that we are all connected. Nature, humanity, the cosmos, all interrelated. The entire cosmos is a cooperative. And when we lose sight of the mutuality and interdependent nature of existence, what happens? We cause great harm to the world. And in this destructiveness, we preclude the future. And so we come back to our own faith tradition. We look at Unitarianism, Universalism. I think the best tools in our tool chest are activism and hope. And we remind each other, we extend this hope to each other that we cannot give up. Well, what exactly is it we cannot give up? And that is that the truth of our interdependence with nature and with others is realized, that everyone will realize this to the fullest extent so that there will be less hate in the world, we do far less harm in the world, and that the generations to come will indeed have a future. Can we close our service this morning, turning our hymn books, please, to number 295. As we go forward together, may we rededicate ourselves to seek truth boldly, to show love constantly, and to serve all humanity faithfully. So the blessings of peace be in our hearts and upon this earth. Amen.